Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our SAPI IP Business Talks. Today, Thursday, and this week we have a guest from Europe, two guests. Dominique Christ is with us, and in the chat for you, also our ambassador from the IP Business Academy, Ivo Emanilov. What is relevant is for you, please chat with us, write your comments and questions in the chat. Then I will pick that up and integrate that in our discussion. That's the reason why we are live with this show. So let's start with Dominique. Dominique is managing director at Denemeyer IP Consulting, and he is very prominent on our platform. You see, for example, his topic, it is IP benchmarking. On the Dplex, he has his own page with tons of content which you can follow here, and also get additional content here, down there, further sources, everything is available for you. He writes also continuously blog posts at, for example, here at our joint presentation at Porsche and MHP in Ludwigsburg at the CTO Forum about IP benchmarking and storytelling. And when you want to have a deep dive and you're not the guy who likes to read, so then you can also follow Dominique on our newest baby on our platform. This is the podcast IP Management Voice, and there is the first episode ever is from Dominique about IP benchmarking and C-level communication. And this is exactly what we want to talk about today. Welcome, Dominique. So we have lots of material already available, but we have still a lot to talk about that. And first of all, please introduce yourself and tell us especially, how did you came into these, let's say, strange or weird field of IP? What brought you to this branch?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to get into this conversation with all of you. And indeed, as you said, my name is Dominique Christ. I'm leading this consulting team of Denemeyer Group, which touches specifically on the business aspects and the business rationale and the strategic aspects of intellectual property. How did I come there? I'm originally a lawyer by background. I started my career with McKinsey & Company, one of the best-known managerial consulting companies in the world, and spent there many, many years and led a lot of top-level executive programs that really touched the core of the business model of each of the companies that we were working with. And so I learned a lot, what matters to the C-suite. I learned a lot about, innovation. I learned a lot about transformation of a company. And I learned a lot in this process also how important intellectual property is and can be for the strategic development of those business models for a company. And so when I was given the opportunity to take over this role here at Denemeyer some 6 years ago, I was of course excited, because effectively we're at the heart of where history or economic history, let's put it this way, is made. Because the world is moving so fast and is ever more evolving, and business models are evolving, and we're getting into a much more virtual world nowadays that is much more complex, but has so many opportunities specifically for scaling that I said this is a great thing that I want to build up with, and I'm still super happy to be having all these high-level strategic discussions of all the IP community, who's looking forward to push things forward and who sees the opportunities.
Yeah, in Chinese there is this saying, you should live in interesting times. and that's definitely what we can say, what we see outside. So I know you were at the IP Service World this week. It's a conference and a fair, trade fair, and so I would like to start with your impressions from this event. So I'm sure you talked with many people there. You gave a presentation about your topic, this making IP as a C-suite priority. So you're doing a lot of that, of marketing about that, communication. You create valuable content there. So you gave a presentation. So what were your insights, and what were the questions? What you are asked from the IP community about that topic?
Yes. So thanks for the good question. I think it's always super interesting to be at conferences in general, but specifically also the IP Service World, which is one of the largest conferences where you really get a lot of exposure to, corporates and corporate thinking and what matters to people. And I think while over recent times there has always been a certain focus on, AI and all these tools and everything that can be done through them. I think that is one aspect, but I think things are changing slightly in terms of what people want to talk about and what they're worried about. And I think this has to do with various effects. I think one is, of course, the economic environment that we're living in nowadays, right? I think things have changed, not for the better, at least for Central Europe and Germany at the moment, where people really see that our very core of our economy and of our business models are somewhat being challenged or are dipping a bit at the moment, and we have to constantly reinvent ourselves. And then the question.
Excuse me. One question is that just for the moment? Because when we look at the automotive industry, for example, I don't see how they will really transform and be able to compete with the Chinese car manufacturers. Just to pick one aspect, yeah. So I don't see that, to be honest, and also many other branches have to really reinvent themselves, and that will be really a challenge. And so I'm not. I just want to say I'm not sure that it is just a temporary aspect. I would say these transformations. So that this is an ongoing transformation. People should understand that this is nothing which goes away like a virus. Yeah. So it is something which we really have to embrace and to cope with and to work with it. So that at least that's my expectation about these dip of the BEP.
I would very much agree with you. I hope the dip does not sustain, but what is for sure that the constant that the speed of how things are changing stays the same or even more increases, right? I mean, if we look at product life cycles over the past years, they're getting ever shorter and ever faster. Product variants, are getting ever wider, and therefore the pressure to, again, as you said rightfully, reinvent yourself and not stick with the old one will stay and will stick, right? And this also requires a new thinking of how we use intellectual property, of how we think strategically about the future, on how we adapt, of how agile, so to say, we are as an economy and as companies. And again, to your question, I think you could see that from the discussions I had at the IP Service World, which again are slightly shifting now towards exactly that. Now, away a bit from what is the next best tool, or what can AI do for me here and there, or who's maybe the cheapest service provider or anything, more towards this, how can we show our impact, right? How can we show the value that we're creating as an IP function, so to say? What's the value at stake? Then also, I mean, we also want to talk a bit about benchmarking. Also, of course, the cost and the organizational side of it, because people are being challenged in these environments. I mean, are we doing things efficiently, right? Do we have the right organizational setup? Do we have the right processes in place to be coping with all these changes that are coming, right? And then and thirdly, and that's probably most importantly, again, what is the value at stake? What is the money that we're currently leaving on the table, maybe, right? But where we can become much better, or if we become much better, that we can still capture in terms of, international markets, market shares, premium prices, just becoming ahead, staying ahead of what's going on and of the development, and sustaining the success of the company.
And okay, that were the questions. So it's shifting towards a more strategic discussion. I think it's good to understand that, obviously. But what was your presentation about? What is your experience on an expectation to this kind of discussion with the C-levels?
Yes. So I want to help IP professionals get through and have the C-suite understand the strategic importance of intellectual property. That is one mission, and that was also a focus of the talk. Because also, oftentimes when I talk to IP professionals, heads of IP around the world, and so on, right, they always struggle to get through, right? A lot of times they are being managed sort of a cost center. They get efficiency targets, their budgets are getting cut, right? And whenever they say something against that, they're not really being listened towards. And so I want to show a way, and we do that also as a consulting unit from Dennemeyer, to be listened to and to be showing that value, right? But what that takes is that you're able to tell a coherent story, right, that has the right language, so to say, and addresses what top management is thinking about. But B, more importantly, maybe even to actually be able to pin down and to nail down, exactly this value at stake and the quantitative part of intellectual property, and therefore also, so to say, you can say benchmark yourself, in terms of your effectiveness that you have, in terms of the efficiency that you have, and again about the value potential that's coming, right? And that is a bit the storyline that I also provided in this talk.
And that's why you use these on the one hand this evaluation, and on the other hand this comparison with others, right? So we have a wonderful question for Maria, and what she asked is, from your experience, when we try to communicate the IP issues to the C-level, so are there specific frameworks or examples which can be used, for example, to understand tangible and intangible risks of doing nothing?
Right. I think that's a wonderful question, right? And it comes right down to the point of how do we quantify the impacts, right, of intellectual property? And it's not easy. I wouldn't say it's an easy task, right? I mean, it can be done somehow back of the envelope, but if you really want to be convincing, you need to drill down, right? And if we're thinking about, there's many effects of intellectual property, many positive effects, qualitative effects. But if we think about the pure quantification, I think there's a couple levers that we can think about. Some more concrete, some are maybe a bit less concrete, but specifically the point is you need to be showing the status quo that you're having currently, right, versus a status where you would not have intellectual property. And I think that it exactly addresses Maria's questions in a way, to say, let's make a what if comparison, right? And if we think about those effects or those quantitative effects, or how to quantify it, I mean, the most obvious thing is, a portfolio sale or a licensing program, right? Then everybody sees the value right there, right? It's right in your P&L, it goes into the balance sheet, you have it quantified, you have the contracts, you have everything, right? That's clear. But if we think about the other effects, some more concrete effects, let's say, again, increased market shares, premium prices, let's really quantify that. Let's say, which part of our product portfolio, so to say, or of our business is actually, right, has a premium price because of the IP that sits around that, right? And then let's create this hypothetical scenario. If we did not have that, right, what would it look like then? On the other hand, then, again, coming to the opportunity costs, no? Everything that's in the pipeline that we know in the next 5 years is on the strategic agenda of the company to be launching. Yeah, if we said we did not employ any IP on that one, I mean, what would be the market success as opposed to what we originally had in the plans with regards to that, right? And that also, I mean, it's an interesting question. Think about it, because it also informs the organization about how strategically you really use intellectual property. Because if the answer is it doesn't make a difference, well, then okay, then you're in a situation where you can say either I drop the whole function, it doesn't matter in my industry or whatever, right? Or I should be doing it in a more professional way, right? But usually it's not. Usually it's the other way around. There's a lot of value at stake and a lot to be gained.
Yeah, and there are very simple approaches also which can be used, like simply mapping how much revenues fall under how many patents. And what we typically see, I did that many years ago and on a series of evaluations for companies, and at the end what you see is that most of the product portfolio which is currently used and making the profits, it's not protected. And most parts of the IP portfolio, trademarks and patents, is simply not used anyhow. Okay, so this, I mean, simply given that, okay, everything can be explained and we have to talk about that, but maybe that makes sense, but maybe not. But fact is that the C-level is absolutely not aware about this situation. So they expect anyhow fuzzy, we have IP and we are protected, yeah, whatever that means. And I mean, obviously that can go extremely wrong, and that can be an extreme, as a very high risk. And I mean, we see that with SEPs, with infringement of standard essential patents. We see that with infringement in open source fields, where people say we have nothing to do with IP because we use open source. So I mean, you can't say something more stupid, but it is said. Yeah? And this is the reality, or quite often the reality in the minds of C-levels, and that is obviously an extremely dangerous. So I mean, you talk with C-levels. We had together these discussion very regularly at the CTO forum, and what is your experience? Why it is so difficult, so hard to make them listening, and also to explain the consequences, the risks, but also the chances, the opportunities. What is your experience on that?
Right. I think there's two major effects or two major root causes. Because if we think about the mind of the C-suite, I mean, they need to be creating value and driving value for the company, right? And they do have an integrated view usually, but nevertheless, typically, if you think about value creation and transforming a company and a program, you want to know, okay, who's my responsible person, right, for a certain initiative or what I'm planning to do, right? And what's the value at stake? No, what's the ROI, so to say, on the money that I'm spending, right? So it has this responsibility aspect, and it also has this quantitative aspect, I think, right? That's the two key things. And for both of them, frankly, I mean, in IP, we're currently a bit at a disadvantage, right? Because if we think about responsibilities, IP is typically a completely dispersed function, so to say, across the company, right? It touches a lot of other functions. No? It touches R&D, it touches HR, so to say, if we think about inventor remuneration, it touches marketing, about the trademarks, right? It touches the business units themselves, right? It touches the executive suite and the legal suite. Everybody's involved, right? But usually there's not one single decision maker, so to say. You know, oftentimes companies are set up in a way that, again, IP might be sitting as a cost center, and then they give recommendations in terms of what to file and what to drop, but then the decision is made somewhere else in the business or so. So one point, it is hard to nail down who's my responsible person if I think about the C-suite, right? But that can be solved, right? I think the more difficult aspect is what we keep on discussing here is a bit, can we put the money on the table? Can we show the value at stake, right? And then typically, we as IP professionals, we're not very good at, or we shy away a bit, just to put these bold numbers, on the table. But it is relevant. I mean, typically IP persons are very diligent persons, who are used to, only give answers that are as accurate as you can, and that is fine. That is a high quality, right? But also being able, to make some bold assumptions and to build together a business case and show all this value that is created maybe on other balance sheets, so to say, or other P&Ls in the company, right, in other functions of the company. It all comes down to the effect of IP, but I need to collect, where in the company is this value being created, and how can I show it in a consolidated way? And if you're able to do that, again, through benchmarking tools, through assumptions and quantifications, and tell a coherent story towards the senior management, then I think you're also being listened to.
You mentioned tools. That is good, because Ivo asked a question about tools. He says that typically companies have the impression that benchmarking is expensive, so a lot of effort which has to be done, and he is asking whether there are tools which maybe can do that on an automatic or robotic way, so that you can monitor things continuously, and that it is not that one snapshot big thing. So do you have experience with such tools, and what is your pros and cons thinking about tools or a straightforward consulting project?
That's also a great question, and thank you, Ivo, for that one. So I think before I can give an answer, I think we need to differentiate. When we say benchmarking, what types of benchmarking can we talk about, or exist, so to say, or are relevant? Let's put it this way, right? I mean, because there's one big part, and it's a very relevant part, no question, is the portfolio benchmarking. A lot of people might be thinking about that one. They say, okay, how does my portfolio compare to a competitive portfolio, right? That comes down to the protective part. But then also, if we think about other parts of where you can do benchmarking, there is, for example, a process benchmarking. Let's say my internal IP processes, how I'm managing my intellectual property in a company, not only in the IP function, but also with other functions in the company, is also something I can benchmark, right? The process benchmark to say, are these processes working in the right way to getting me to this desired result? So, for example, if we talk about the invention process, is the invention process, are the inventors sufficiently informed by all the information that is sitting in the IP function, or is it the other way around, that they just go ahead and invent something and then IP comes later in the process and file or doesn't file, or it was more the reactive way? That's a simple example, but it shows a bit, this aspect of process benchmarking. Then
so
there is
what you say is one kind of benchmark goes about the outputs. So this is what we see that are, for example, the portfolio which is filed, and then we can compare it between companies. We can compare it in branches. We can compare it with business models. So that is the output orientated perspective. And the other is more process or input oriented. So
absolutely.
Okay. And when you want to benchmark that, so how can you make sure that others will I mean when you use filing, so that is something which is at least after 18 months, when we talk about patents, this is public available data, and even when we say the comparability is maybe an issue, but basically we can observe it. So when you want to compare, to benchmark internal processes, so how can you make sure that others will cooperate with you and will be willing to talk with you about such topics.
Right. So again, I like this. I like the separation of internal and output oriented, right? And also a bit incorporating Ivo's question, what warrants, so to say, a consulting project or some more dedicated effort versus some tools, right? And how do you actually set that up? So if we talk about, let's maybe start with the internal perspective. So if we talk about the internal perspective and process efficiency, organizational efficiency, so to say, am I set up in the right way? Which also has to do then with cost that I'm spending, for example, on IP service providers. Then indeed, yeah, I think this is a clear thing for a consulting project in the beginning, at least, to be setting up this benchmarking logic. Why? Because your internal processes are per definition company bespoke, right? So there's probably no tool in the world, that can exactly, predict or be as generic, to really show your internal company process in the right way and compare it against other company processes, right? I think that's just not meaningful, right? So I think here you need to do a bespoke effort to really say, okay, these are my core processes that I'm running internally in the company. Then there's also an outsourced part that is being run there. I set up this logic, right? And I calculate a bit, what is so to say my internal spend, based on the hours or the effort that I'm internally spending and what my internal people are costing me, right? Versus what I'm outsourcing and what that is costing me, right? For the outsourced part, it's a bit more easy to do a market benchmark, but again, you need to set up at the beginning the right framework that you can then replicate. I mean, once it's set up, it can be done again and again on a more automated way, so that doesn't need to be a consulting project all the time.
I would say that depends heavily on the business model and the branch and the technology, right? So when I think about, let's say, quantum computing, so these patterns are terribly complex, for example, or biotech stuff, things like that. And on the other hand, we have in mechanics, electrical world, we have relatively easy to understand and not so hard to write them down patterns simply for the drafting process. So it's extremely difficult to compare that, right?
Right. It is. And therefore, you also need to make adjustments for exactly these industry specificities, so to say, or the product specificities. In the model that you're building, you're making exactly this discount, so to say, or upgrades on how long a process should take, right? Or what's so to say the meaningful benchmark, right? And to your question, I mean, where does this know-how come from? I mean, on the one hand, of course, we employ experts within the consulting unit, who have worked in those specific industries and in different industries, right, as IP practitioners, and who've run IP departments and who actually know what the cost should be or what the length of the typical process, so to say, for the preparations, so to say, of a drafting or filing should be, right? On the other hand, I mean, it's also interesting and meaningful, since you talked about the CTO forum and all these discussions, to be also having these discussions across, non-competitive companies in a way, to be saying, hey, can we somehow develop this in a way where, where it's not strategic, where it's not, confidential in a way, not portfolio related, but can we create these, databases of where we also compare ourselves against each other and benchmark each other, right? And therefore, move forward, so to say, as an industry group. Right. And
yeah, I mean, that would be extremely meaningful, especially when you have comparables with others, because I hear that very often when we talk about the ISO and DIN quality standards, and that at the end, these questions are how much money I have to spend for IP. So what is reasonable, what makes sense, and then and having these comparables, for example, in different industries. That would make a lot of sense to show what kind of activity and what level of activity is necessary. So we have that wonderful blog post from Plockel about a UK initiative. Robert, I've also I made a podcast episode about that. The UK office is supporting SMEs to make an audit about potential SEP infringements in their business models. And that is a wonderful example that you need that strategic approaches about IP. Otherwise, you have an extremely high risk exposure for your whole business model and not just for one or two products. I think that makes a lot of sense. What Maria asks again is also very interesting. She says typically, I said in my words, okay. Typically, when we look at patents, we see them as molds. Yeah? So blocking others, creating exclusivity, forbidding rights. So due to the digitalization, we see more and more the usage of IP, like in ingredient branding, but also what Ivo says when we talk about software as a service concept. In this world, patents are much more bridges. So you want to open your API, you want to make sure that others have access to your data, whatever. When we see this necessity to integrate IP in the business model, wouldn't that make it easier to communicate the value of IP to C-levels?
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's at the core of, you know, maybe the output-oriented type of benchmarking. No? That is basically the other part. No? I mean, instead of showing, you know, simple filing trends, you know, or just nice bubble charts that do not really speak to anyone, right? Except for maybe the community or the practitioners who kind of get a feeling, right? But it doesn't tell a story, right? It also comes down comes back to Ivo's question, you know, what should I use those tools? Yes, there's a lot of tools that give you automatic bubble charts, but that's not the point, right? The point is, or the starting point actually needs to be, you know, to be starting from the business model itself, no? And how the company is creating value over the next years and sustaining this value, and then the role that IP strategically plays in preserving that or in empowering that or driving that, right? I think that needs to be the point. And exactly as Maria is saying, I mean, the protective part is one part, right? Depends a bit on the industry, but also in the evolutionary part, it can also be the other way around, that it actually builds bridges. But also, in order to build a bridge, I need to have it first, right? So I need to know, you know, what matters to the other business partner in terms of, you know, IP rights that are valuable and meaningful to them.
Yeah,
and then I need to strategically work for them.
To a certain extent. So my experience when I'm working with companies, or not working, discussing with them more, it is the fact that because these assets are intangible, yeah, and most managers are trained to work with tangible assets. So these intangibles, like you mentioned, HR, like marketing, like a good marketing campaign is extremely valuable. But how can you touch it? Yeah, this you can see some creative outputs. Yeah, but the logic of these of this campaign lies behind that, and it's an intangible asset. And can we, I mean, you mentioned bubble diagram. So, okay, obviously this is mostly not helpful because it's not a story. So what I understand what you say is we have to combine that. So we have to create visuals, data-driven, data-based. But at the end, it is not the visual itself. It is the overarching story behind that, which has to fit to the business model. And maybe that is the most challenging thing, because when you talk with IP, with heads of IP, quite often they have their problems to explain the role of IP within the business model. So what you hear is something like, we protect our inventions. So yes, but at the end of the day, what is really the contribution to the business? So I would say this combination, so really understanding the role of that IP, maybe as a mold or as a bridge, that is a cornerstone also on these benchmarking, because just collecting data is typically meaningless. It's just effort.
Absolutely correct. That's exactly the point. I think you really nailed it down. And we should even start there. We should start about, the business models, telling about, the future of the company, and then showing on each point of the business model, so to say, virtually or visually, how does IP come into play? What is the effect, so to say, towards our customers, towards the competitors, either block them or create corporations, so to say, what is the effect, so to say, on the product side, and which type of IP has this effect, right? And that's still qualitative in a way. And then we can start moving to the quantitative side and saying, okay, now I've shown you, in this area, so to say, the importance of, having the relevant patents, let's say, in a certain technology space. And now I can show you, how I'm comparing, or how my fighting trends are in this strategic sub-technology field as opposed to my competitors, right? And then you can see it visually.
And as Maria said, these we have, for example, branches, situations, and they, due to the ecosystem world and the digitalization, that happens more and more, that we have these co-opetition situation. Yes. So that we are in one for one product, in one field, we are competitors. In others, we cooperate, and or over the time. These roles changing. So we have that in the automotive industry. We have that in so a Renault motor engine is in a Mini, and so we have that in aeronautics. We have that in more or less every digital product. So Samsung, Apple, wherever, and that means that even for one company, or it over the time, this role of IP can change also. So the narrative, the story is different.
Not even over time, but even, it's a perfect point that you make, Alex. Even within the same company, but for different types of business models, right? And that's also what speaks against these broad or generic comparisons. If we take the example of BMW and Mercedes also, if I show, that they might be competing head on, so to say, in certain features, the motor or so, for example, right? But then it's not enough just to show a generic picture, that shows general filing trends across the company, or the full portfolio, right? If I actually want to talk about another business model, let's take here the taxi app that they ran some years ago jointly, where they actually wanted to have this autonomous taxis in the cities, right? That might be a completely different picture and a completely different subset of technology or IP rights that I need to show that rather promote this co-opetition in a way, and it's a complete different game.
Yeah, and also let's say the meaning of the products, is changing. And so I just want to focus on these. We protect our inventions. So that this is simply meaningless. The meaning of products is changing, and so the question, what I want to protect, is changing. So when we look at smartphones, just as one example, or we can look at cars or whatever. So over the time, the meaning of that product has changed. So I remember that with my first mobile phone, I had mainly or only calls, because that was the only thing what this mobile phone was able to do. So it was a phone basically, and obviously questions like the noise reduction, quality of signal, that kind of patents were filed then, okay, because people wanted to talk with each other in a call.
Yes.
So that shifted, obviously. So we have still phones, but now that are smartphones, and you can say the usage using a smartphone for having calls is reduced to maybe 5% or less. So my son, for example, he is 17. Sometimes I think he don't know that he could make a call, but he's avoiding that like hell, so doing anything else. So what we protect now, what we the customer experience, the usage of these tools as a navigation system, for example, as a management support, that is something completely different what we want to protect or where we want to have exclusivity today. And that means even for the same product over time, for example, the story why we need IP and what we are doing with that IP can also change.
Correct. And also probably the type of IP, effectively. If I take that example, for phones, I mean, ever since the introduction of the iPhone, I mean, even though it's now some years ago, but we all know, that branding, and design matter a lot, right? I mean, if we think about the first phones, they were, really heavy bricks, basically. Nobody was talking about design or, it was just the functionality, as you said, of making a call. So it was maybe more patent heavy, right? And now it's changing toward this user experience in terms of, then also trademarks and design rights that are needed, right? But I need to be understanding this connection, and that's again the integration, as you said, between the business side or the strategic side of the company and the IP side, to be talking to each other and say what matters to the customer and which parts of the business model are being protected by which IP rights, right?
So another question, it's my last question because we're running out of time, but when I assume that at the end of the day, what you want to do is you want to work with companies to implement benchmarking programs, and then you have to explain what is the benefit of such a procedure for the business. Could you give us some insights here and some take-home messages how we can argument that for the business?
Yes, happy to do so. And again, it really depends on the situation that you're in as a company and what you want to achieve, right? I mean, if we think about what we discussed lastly, let's say the output benchmarking, it really helps you to be strategically thinking about value creation for the company, which is a super important lever, right? And which is the strategic foresight, and which also helps senior management to understand the relevance of intellectual property as a function, right? If we talk about maybe the input side that we discussed about, that's a cost function, so to say. If you're being challenged on costs, right, and you do need to cut down, or you need to understand where to cut, then that gives you an orientation of whether I'm spending my money on the right things, right? Whether I'm paying fair prices, and whether I'm actually getting the value that I should be getting at, right? And the third angle, so to say, bringing it all together, and we did this or are doing this many times for companies, is to actually start a transformation of a company. I think that's the third benefit, so to say. So we're not talking to the C-suite just for the sake of it, but we want to start seeing some changes in the company, right? Instead of bottom up fighting our way through the organization and trying to educate everyone, we want to get that attention, unlock resources, money wise, people wise, to be driving changes in a positive way.
Okay, so I take that as the final, the famous final words. Thank you very much, Dominique, for joining us in our live talk here on LinkedIn. Please stay a bit with us on LinkedIn. Sven and others, Sven Boone and others have comments and quite tricky questions, lengthy questions. So I was not able to bring that on the table during the show. But very, very relevant aspects are discussed there. So please help us with your experience and discuss with us that now on LinkedIn. So thank you very much to all of you. And I'm looking forward to having the next live show. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.